Finally, we can say, what's the definition of obedience? Usually you would say it is your ability or your capacity to agree with or to say yes to something that you have been told to do, whether it comes as a command or whether it comes as a request, a suggestion, but immediately you say yes, or sometimes maybe not so immediately, but the answer comes yes, I will do it, I can do it. But I wanted to take it on a slightly different level, this whole aspect of obedience, and that is to examine the state of the mind that allows us to obey or disobey, so to speak. And very quickly, I think Dr. Manoj introduced to you this whole aspect of who am I, and the inner workings of that true identity of who we are, which is really the soul. And as a soul, we have such a huge, huge capacity and potential, and everything that we do, actually, it is the soul that's doing it. And we, of course, look at it as a very tiny living point of light. But within that is what we call the faculties, different faculties that we work with. Just as we have the faculty to see, we have the faculty to hear. In the same way, the soul also has some very subtle faculties, and the faculty of the mind is one of them. And so we pay a lot of attention to taking care of ourselves, our other faculties, our physical faculties. But how much do we really take care of the faculty of the mind? And at any given moment, how would you qualify or quantify even the state of the mind? And I think it is how much, one of the ways of explaining or defining it is how much the mind is filled with a sense of values. And to that extent, I feel the mind is healthy, right? The mind is also strong. Now, in terms of obedience, what is the state of the mind that allows you to be obedient externally? And I was thinking about it, and I was really feeling that obedience is really something that happens inside in the mind. Perhaps it's not even something that just happens all of a sudden, but it's a state of the mind. It's a state of mind that we are able to maintain, in which there is a kind of a, not this noisiness, this quietness, so that, when all of a sudden we are told to do something or not do something, or, we have a chance to do something, then it really comes as a clear stimulus for the mind that this is an opportunity, this is a chance, this is my ask. This is the ask out of me at this time. I'm not mixing it with a lot of other kind of thoughts. So there is that stillness of the mind, because what really happens within the soul is, as much as the mind is a conscious mind, but there's also something that is very subconscious and unconscious, and we all know about it. And in the Raj Yoga terminology, we use the word sanskars, or memories. Memories, of course, are, you can remember them, but there are memories that you don't remember, and they have become so submerged in the soul. We call them sanskars. And so we have deep-rooted sanskars or traits of perhaps having obeyed, I'm just giving an example, having perhaps obeyed someone and not having a good result out of that. I was told to do something, but I actually ended up being punished for that. I just imagine what kind of memory or feeling or trait it will leave in the soul. So the soul carries those kind of traits or sanskars. And when it is time now for me to be exposed to say yes or no to someone that's asking me to do something, that memory may pop up, that sanskar may pop up, right? And I may instantly say, whether out of fear, or out of insecurity, out of not knowing what, I would say no. Without even thinking, I would say no. And I don't know what's happening, why I said no, but I said no. So that's one reason. And so, but then as a just to counteract that, impulse that we may be having, we also have another faculty within the soul. And that faculty kind of gives you higher guidance. It allows you to travel the higher path, in which we don't just get grounded by what happened way back when, but we are actually dictated and guided by some eternal truths and some natural laws or phenomena that happen. And we call that part of the soul as the intellect, the higher self, the higher faculty that's able to guide us. And that can tell you that, no, there's a lot of good in this, and you can really take a lot of benefit if you really do what you're being told to do. So there's all these different forces that are actually acting on the mind. One is the voice coming from outside. The other is the voice coming from way back when, from my sanskars, of something in the past. And the other is a voice that's coming from my higher self, seeing the benefit, looking into the future, and really looking out for my good. Now, this is why I want to emphasize, one thing here. Although we've been talking a lot about obedience from an external point of view or a person-to-person point of view, perhaps, and maybe that's why, it's giving a lot of times, it gives, the connotation is really one, if I obey, it means I'm subservient. If I obey, it means someone is imposing something on me, that I have to do it, that I'm losing my free will. And all of these are connotations when we just use the word obedience in normal day-to-day life. I know this is a very special group of people, and maybe this doesn't apply to you, but usually, when we use the word obedience, even as children these days, the connotation is very different. And so I'm just saying, where does that come from? It is because of, this inner working in which, we feel that we are being dictated by someone else, but not really using our own inner or higher wisdom. But just to remember that, why do we even have a quality or a value such as obedience? And as I said before, the mind, for it to be able to listen to that higher wisdom, there is some kind of obedience in and within itself, isn't it? But I was also thinking in terms of the person-to-person kind of obedience, and I think it was very beautifully covered as you captured the summary about where are the main areas or relationships in our life that we really talk about obedience as an important quality. And in all these relationships, I think there's always this element, I feel, that at any given point in time as human beings, we are limited. We are limited in knowing what is best for us. For example, as a child is limited in knowing what is best, and that the fire burns and the knife cuts and all of these. So the parents definitely have to guide and sometimes put foot down and say what is not good, and you don't touch it. So of course it's part of, it's a good part of sustenance or, growing up children, of course, to give them the right kind of instructions, directions, suggestions. And so there is a lot of good in it. And it's an important quality at that point. The same way also as we grow up, as we have our as students, we are teachers to do it the easy way. Otherwise we could be laboring and using all kinds of long, devious methods to find the solution to the problem. But the teacher always gives us easy methods, right? To kind of get to the, kind of gets us, you know, on a certain baseline, so that we use those baseline principles and come up with the solution or the result of the research or whatever we are doing in school. So definitely that's a necessary. As a doctor, for example, you know, or a physician or a healthcare provider of any sort, you know how important obedience is, right? Of course, we don't call it obedience, we call it compliance in that professional term. And oftentimes how you get upset, you know, I would get upset if you've told a patient, you know, you're supposed to take this medicine for a full 1 week and then stop it, and the patient finally says, you know, no, I felt fine within a day or two, and then I stopped the medicine. And I would say, but I didn't tell you that, you know, you had to take it for a full course. So there we call it compliance. Why is that necessary? Because obviously there is some kind of a professional knowledge and experience involved in giving that direction or that, you know, instruction to the patient. So there's always benefit and there's always some goodwill, isn't it? You know, when we are asking for obedience, there is always some benefit for the person who obeys, and there's always goodwill on the part of the person who is actually giving the instruction. And so not to forget that. So there's a lot of validity to why obedience is necessary and has to be part of our value and has to be part of our full decoration, so to speak. As you heard, that values are our decoration in life, and we do need that. So, and most importantly, I also feel that, you know, obedience is actually a kind of a bridge between people. You know, it's a value that bridges people. And the more we are able to display and practice obedience, again, in a natural way, you can tell that, you know, the other person is automatically drawn to you. So it's a big part of the equation of relationship, I feel. It draws love, it draws attention, it draws help, it draws cooperation, and we even believe it draws blessings. I think especially in the Indian tradition, it's a big thing, right? To be able to obey the elders and seek their blessings before you grow up and go out on your own. So there's a lot to it in terms of that kind of help that comes from the other side. Another big thing is a trust. You know, it's a trust that you develop. Somebody develops in you if they see you, that you're always not only complying, but also you're always obedient and you're on time and you're all of those things. So it's a lot of love, cooperation, trust, and actually I see it as you know, as a big benefit. You know, the big benefits are really about, most importantly, as we talked again before, it makes life easy. It makes us light. The whole energy of how we do things changes, that we don't have to use too much of our intellect. It's like, you know, it's almost like, you know, helping ourselves when we are obedient. That all of you must be aware of this, that it takes a lot more energy to resist something, to oppose something, to question something, to doubt something, and to come out with your own answers, than to have the faith that yes, there is good in this. Of course, it's a matter of coming to that point of faith. You know, in a parent-to-child relationship, it happens automatically. There is no question whether the parent will wish the child well or not. But in other relationships, sometimes it doesn't happen so easily, especially for the authority. You know, all of us have some kind of, maybe this person has an ulterior motive or self-interest, and therefore this person is asking me to do this. So it's just that we have to come to that point of recognition and faith in obeying that person. So as I was saying, the benefits of being obedient is one, it really eases up, the whole personality and the energy, making us very light in, in what we have to do. And I think all of us know for a fact that if you have to rise the ladder, if you have to, go up the ladder of leadership, so for example, and we all know that a good leader is also a good follower, right? A good follower is also a good leader. So at some point in time, we have all seen the importance of following accurately, being disciplined, keeping up with the instructions exactly as, they were given to us, and the result we got out of that. And so there is this whole idea. And I suppose the stricter the orders, the more stringent the standards of, obedience, the higher you rise, actually, as you can see in the military and in the high government authorities and everything. And so it's a really, really, I think it's an elusive value, actually, that it doesn't come across as a value that has so many benefits. At the offset, seems like, I'm losing more, but actually I'm gaining a lot more than I'm investing or losing while practicing, obedience as such. So sometimes I was thinking today also that, obedience is, one thing is when you're told to do something that could have, a big impact. But the other thing is, sometimes it's just a small little ask. Somebody is asking you to do something and you don't think much of it, and of course it's part of a big project perhaps. And you don't think much of it, and you say, you know what, this is going to take so much time, and I really don't have the energy for it now, or I don't want to do it. You kind of make excuses around excuses, and you kind of say no. But I've also found that, those little chances that we get in life actually may be doorway to big opportunities, because based on those little opportunities, little chances that we take, we are able to open up our fortune to big things. And I think some of you might have heard about this example, since so many of you are, familiar with the VKs. I'm sure you must have heard about this example of Jagdish Bai, who was just one of the students at one point, but our teacher, our founder, Ramapaba, asked him to write an article on some particular subject. And of course, what happened overnight was, the electricity was lost. And so everybody said, okay, there's no light, we can't write. But what did Jagdish Bai do? He went around under the street light, or the one light that was there in the campus, and he did his assignment, and he brought it back next. And the blessing, of course, he got after that was that he would be the public spokesperson, the writer for the whole organization. And he got this big boon. And so he kept up, of course, that boon. So things like that remind you. It was a very tiny little, ask, isn't it? But it opened up his door to so many, such a huge fortune of standing up for the organization. So like that, I've also seen that, there are times when I would have thought not much of, what I was asked to do. But then down the line, it led to something else and something else, and you get chances after chances. And so we have a very nice saying here, and those who take chances, they become chancellors. So although it's not a command, it's not, but it is an opportunity. And that is equally, I equally have the freedom to say yes or no to that. And so the more I am able to be in the right state of mind at that moment, willing to accept and willing to respond with respect, whatever is being asked of me, I feel that's obedience. In other words, it's an inner state of mind that allows us to consider with respect and respond with willingness and acceptance, right? Now, even though externally I may not be able to I'm asked for cooperation for something, I don't have the time, I really don't know how to do it. But internally, I'm saying yes, because I know and I believe it's going to be a lot of benefit in it. And so I'm able to even offer my mental cooperation, subtle cooperation. And I also become part of the obedient, team that's actually making it successful. So obedience is, as much as it is something external, it is also an inner state of mind that allows us to respond any command or request with that very, very deep and genuine respect and also willingness and acceptance, I feel. How do we cultivate? One is to know that, there was this exercise of getting to know yourself, areas that you're not obedient, and many of you beautifully take up some aspect of the other of obedience, how you're going to actually take it into action. And that's very nice. But I was just thinking, again, going back to this internal aspect of obedience, the spiritual aspect of obedience. One is our conscience, as I was saying, the part of us, the part of the soul that's saying, yes to the right thing, no to the wrong thing. It's actually, we coin it as a conscience, inner voice. A habit of listening to our inner voice. Excuse me. And that's something that we have to cultivate. So I feel that, yes, we can jump into saying that I'm going to be obedient. But the first one that we need to be obedient is to our own inner voice of conscience. Because the conscience knows everything. What's right, what's wrong. Even a little child, if a little child goes and hits another child and comes back, you haven't said anything to him or her, but he starts crying immediately. I don't know how many of you have experienced this, right? So he's the one who has hit the other child. But when he comes back and faces the parent or, whatever the person is, he starts crying. And I've had this many times before. And I wondered always, what's wrong? Obviously, even this little child has a conscience, right, inside, saying that I did something wrong, or I hurt somebody, or I shouldn't have done that, and the guilt is there. But of course, over a period of time, what we tend to do, especially as adults, is we tend to kind of downplay the conscience, suppress the conscience, and do one wrong action over the other wrong action over the other wrong action, until it gets to be something normal for you, right? Our own standard becomes different. So the first practice, or as I was saying, for cultivating, obedience, would be this whole aspect of holding the conscience with a lot of respect and honor, and listening to that inner voice. And I believe that's what we do, at the end of the day. I think many of us, we hold, we kind of bring the whole day in front of the screen of the mind, and we ask ourselves, in what aspect did I disobey my own conscience? It's not so much somebody else, but in what aspect did I disobey my own conscience, or something in it? What part of my conscience is still kind of biting me, or it's lurking, something is lurking behind in my back. I can't even pinpoint sometimes exactly what it is. It may just have been a subtle attitude that I was holding in my mind. I may not have even said anything, but I might have thought something bad for someone. But that will still come back to me at the end of the day. And I would still need to kind of clear it, in other words, clear it so that it doesn't build one on top of the other, on top of the other. So I'll need to clear my conscience. So a big part of that, of course, is self-reflection, a regular habit of self-reflection. And as often as you do it is good. End of the day, finally, definitely, but maybe a few times a day. And maybe if a long time has passed by, then take a little longer time, a half a day, a couple of hours, to really do a self-check and a kind of like a mini reflection retreat for yourself, so to speak. The other thing is that, the core of the being of all the souls is truth, right? Every soul is made up of that truth, that light that we talk about, that pure light, that pure consciousness that we talk about. So that is exactly the substance of the soul. But then in our day-to-day life, the degree to which we are able to access that truth varies, right? And for some of us, it even varies from time to time to time to time. So again, how are we able to access that truth and come to that experience of I, the pure, conscient consciousness, the soul, the light? It's only in silence, isn't it? So in silence, for me to be able to align myself, align my external life, my physical life, to that internal truth, again, through silence. And then, of course, there are principles. I call them principles, laws of nature. Of course, we know about laws of the matter, but laws of spirituality, laws of, principles of spirituality, the laws of give and take. For example, the giving of sorrow ends up in taking of sorrow, right? For example. So deep inside, we know all of these things, as I was just saying about this little child, So, but then again, how much do we put our intellect, put our mind and intellect to actually grasp the relevance of that in our life? And this is what I feel happens when we take up spiritual study as a regular habit. Spiritual study in any form, reading spiritual books, like you said before, for us, it's our daily dose of, the godly versions. But the more we listen to it, the more we read it, the more we understand it, the more we are able to really not just treat it as a concept or a reality outside of us, but as a reality that exists inside of us and impacts us in a very deep way, moment to moment, day to day. So spiritual study of, the laws, in the relevance of obedience, as I said, what is really happening when I'm obeying is I'm actually surrendering, right, to my intellect, to that higher authority. In most cases, for us, it is, of course, God. But the surrendering of the intellect takes away a lot of burden of the ego and the burden of responsibility and all of that. So that's a spiritual aspect. So the more we study it and the more we grasp it, the more we're able to do it and embrace obedience as a natural phenomenon. So I really feel that obedience to the self comes first, and that has to do with our conscience, that has to do with our alignment with the truth of the soul, that has to do with complying with the principles and the laws of spirituality, which is of reason and consequence. If you do something, that would happen. If you do that, this would happen. So to come to terms with that, and so that it becomes, and I obey my own self, inner self, my higher wisdom, it becomes easy for me to obey the other, the person who is in charge or authority. For example, even the way we follow the traffic rules, sometimes you can tell, right? Sometimes when I'm not in a good state of mind, then I'm very rash, I'm very I don't care, I sometimes even don't notice the red light. But there are other times when I have really sat with myself and I'm calm, I'm composed, I've cleared my conscience. And in those times, you're careful, you're accurate, you're doing what is right, even in terms of the traffic laws. In fact, you even become more courteous, even if the other person is not obeying, you still say, it's okay, let the person go ahead of you. So why? Because you have listened to yourself, you've created that still, stable state of mind in which, you can kind of let go of things that are not right, that are coming, and yet do what is right for you at that moment. And eventually, of course, it will also help others to make right moves. I want to paint a little bit of a history, not so much of a history, but of time, the times that we are in and the cultures that we come from, in terms of obedience, because I think it has a lot to do, as against Eastern versus the Western culture. I think we all know how different we are, in spite of all the mixing and the mingling and the globalization of everything. It's some things are still ingrained in certain people as they are ingrained from cultural point of view. So, and of course, in the Eastern traditions, I think it's a very relationship-centered culture, in most of the relationship-centered culture. And I don't want to exclude or make it a pragmatic statement here, but usually my observation that in most cultures that are relationship-centered, family-centered, is you would find that obedience comes easy. It is one of the main qualities within the family, even as we are brought up. Whereas in some cultures where relationships are still good, but they're not the main focus of well-being and progress, other values come in, taking priority. And you do see that obedience is not given that much of importance. And you will ask the question, whose fault is it? Is it the child's fault? Is it the parent's fault, or what? Now, I don't think it's a matter of fault, but I think it's a matter of just how it is, what it is. That as times have, drifted, and as culture has, kind of, what should I say, transformed over the years and over history, I think that deep bond of loving, benevolent relationships has become dilute. And therefore, I feel, even when a parent says something to the child, it's taken up sometimes not with that same amount of respect and acceptance. And of course, it becomes then mutual, But I feel that, the love and how you say it is so important. So historically speaking and culturally speaking, I think we need to have some consideration of, how to deal with people that come our way, and we notice that they are, not at all obedient, or they go totally against the authority or whatever. So there are some cultures that have been suppressed, of course, by authority. And so there is a lot of fear, there is a lot of insecurity in following authorities and, obeying authorities. So to be culturally also sensitive to these things while we are dealing, why I'm bringing it up is because we may have to give that consideration as we come across people from parts of the world and from, historical backgrounds that have a lot of, burden that they are carrying from the past of being suppressed and so on by authorities in the name of obedience. So, yeah, the very reason why, obedience has become a big question mark, or disobedience has become more of a mark, is, I think, the misuse of the value of obedience. And I want to talk about that a little bit also. It could happen right from the beginning, even from our family setting, in the name of, the parent, the authority figure, to really mistreat children. I mean, and I think we've had quite a history of that, how we would punish children and, and the ways to punish children, and to really use violence to punish children. And so I think all of that over the years might have accumulated to this aspect of why should I follow, why should I obey? And so it's just, again, one more part of the equation to remember that it's actually being used or misused to promote an ego structure in many instances, even as parents, and of course, even as authorities. And it's not being said, or the direction is not being given in the right context. So definitely there is cause for disobedience to develop, or at the least, people would obey, but not necessarily with respect. I have to obey because of fear. I think that was one of the reasons that was cited before. Am I obeying because of fear, or am I obeying because of my respect and love for, sometimes it's not even the person, but just the direction that is given, that there's something benefit for me in this instruction. And so even if it is not told to me in the right way, I am going to still do it. So that kind of an holding on to the principle of obedience. So just to consider that. So it may be more of a reactive, thing. And I think all of us are aware of, how do you deal with children, for example. They will not do exactly as you tell them to, just because you're telling them to do it that way. They'll do it the other way. And so you use reverse psychology, right? So if you don't want them to do something, then you tell them to do something. And if you want them to do something, tell them don't do it. So it's almost like that mental, frame has changed, and again, over the years, in which we have to be really smart to kind of, to work our way through, especially people that we are dealing with, whether as children or whether as our employees, or whether as our patients, or whatever, whoever we have to get across an important direction. We have to be now sensible and smart and sensitive to all these issues. So a lot of love when you have to, obedience for me also includes not just me obeying, but how can I encourage obedience in others also. So that is also equally important. So as much as I can be loveful, use reverse psychology by all means. And I also want to bring in this idea of conversation, which is really, it's not that I tell you and you do it and you have to follow it, and that's the end of the story. But as you very well heard the question come up before, there are times in our life, in our interactions and jobs, professions these days that we come across, people who give us directions that we don't agree with, right? And so again, a good strategy, which was mentioned already, is a good conversation. And I can't promote it enough, especially for parent-child relationship and compliance kind of issues. There is nothing that a good, loveful, respectful conversation cannot achieve, especially if as a parent you feel that your child is very disobedient. And so there must be something on the other side that I'm not aware of, that I need to become aware of, before I can push just my value as a value for the sake of a value. So not to kind of ignore the humanness of the soul that is being disobedient at that time. And finally, I just wanted to also, since so many of you are with the BKs, and I wanted to say just a few words about our, and the other thing I wanted to, and this is the lead on from there, and the best way to promote obedience is, of course, through your own example, right? So we've all heard story of that child, who just sees the parents, lying, the mother's, telling the father that there's a call for you on the call, and the father is telling the mother, tell him I'm not here. And so what does the child hear? What does the child see? Dishonesty. And yet he's being told all the time, why were you not truthful? Why did you lie? So definitely, of course, the precursor of obedience is to have good examples, role models in front of us. So let us all aim to be that. And with that being said, I just wanted to mention the example of Brahma Baba, founder of the Brahma Kumaris, and his level of obedience. And of course, he actually started the organization. He started the whole movement. He was the one who was the recipient of knowledge, the revelations and the realizations that started the whole movement. And yet, in terms of his obedience was to none but one. And that is the one supreme, the one God, right? So, and of course, he is somebody that you don't see, you don't hear, practically speaking, but that internal connection that he developed over time with the Supreme that allowed him to access what is it that God wants me to do at this time. Let me listen to that first. Let me absorb that first. And everything else comes later. And of course, he did, of course, have to face a lot of opposition and obstacles. But his mainstay was, I'm not doing anything on my own, but I'm doing what I'm being told, directed, guided to do by God. So that absolute integrity that he had, not to say that, yes, just because I'm a leader of this organization, I can take over. No, but he was such a great follower in the right sense of the word, following God's knowledge, God's directions that came, of course, through him, but also, God's request, So we have many examples and stories of how he never ever took upon himself the ultimate decision or the judgment of anything, but he always would defer to the trust that he had, created, the trust of women. He would always defer to, a messenger that could bring message from God. And so many examples of that he was totally obedience personified. And I think for all of us, in fact, to perfect any of these values, I think the easy way and the quick way and the best way to do it is to practice it in our relationship with God, with the Supreme, which is what you've all been talking about, that, I as a soul am limited. I as a soul do not have all the knowledge, all the wisdom. I am not as broad-minded or as far-sighted, but God is. Even when it comes to my personal life, He knows more about me and my attributes and my weaknesses than anybody else. So yes, let me always put that one first in terms of who I listen to, who I absorb from, and who do I follow, even for my personal life, right? Which we call our supreme directions. So I'm going to Om Shanti. Let's spend a little time inside, getting to know ourselves, and most importantly, to get to know the mind that I call my mind. I, the soul, a tiny point of living energy and light. I'm the one who guides the mind. I hold the reins of my mind in my hands. And as that guide, I connect with that inner wisdom that comes from God. In silence. When I block out all the other sounds and noises, I begin to listen to the voice of truth. The voice of good. The voice of benevolence. The voice of love. My inner voice. Fueled by God's wisdom. Becomes my guide. For what I think, what I say, what I do. And if anything is not clear, I step into this silence even deeper. Connect with God with my mind. As my parent, as my teacher, as my guide. As my eternal surgeon who knows all my illnesses and weaknesses. Not only do I listen to his directions, but I open my mind to receive all his treasures. The highest knowledge, the purest love, and I allow that knowledge and love to answer my questions, remove my doubts, and lead me on this path. The path of not only finding the good for myself, but also making it good for others. And I already notice that my mind that was scattered has become still. And in the stillness has found the strength to follow. To respond with respect. To be willing to accept and change course if I need to. And to completely surrender to the will of God, the one who is all good. Om Shanti.